Hey everyone! Today, we're diving into a shocking revelation. The FBI just discovered something absolutely terrifying inside the mansion of Rick Harrison's mother, the famous star of Pawn Stars. What they found is shaking the entire nation. Stay tuned. A mysterious discovery inside Rick Harrison's mother's mansion is leaving America in shock. What the feds uncovered is not only shocking, but also raises chilling questions about what's really behind the glitz of Pawn Stars. If you're stunned by what the feds just uncovered in Rick Harrison's mother's mansion, drop a one on chutties in the comments. But if you think it's all just a conspiracy theory, leave a double taki. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest mysteries. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the vast Las Vegas desert, a quiet storm was brewing in one of the city's wealthiest neighborhoods. Nestled there was a luxurious mansion, soon to become the epicenter of a jaw-dropping event. To the outside world, Rick Harrison was a household name, the face of the hit reality show Pawn Stars, and a symbol of the American dream. This savvy businessman had built a pawn empire, turning dusty relics into instant cash. Millions admired him, flocking to his gold and silver pawn shop to meet the man who had turned haggling into an art form. His reality TV show catapulted him to stardom. But behind the glitz and polished public persona, a dark undercurrent was silently simmering, a secret that would shatter the illusion of Harrison's success and send shockwaves across the nation. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, in what seemed like a routine probe, stumbled upon something no one could have anticipated. A hidden room inside Harrison's mother's mansion, sealed off from the rest of the house for years. What they found inside was not only chilling, but horrified the entire country. The room wasn't just an abandoned space collecting dust. It was a vault of horrors, stacks of cash, piles of untraceable documents, weapons, and most terrifying of all, evidence pointing to a gruesome human trafficking ring. Rick Harrison, the man millions trusted, seen as a beacon of hard work, success, and integrity, was allegedly tied to a sinister and terrifying criminal network. What started as a standard financial investigation quickly spiraled into a horrifying revelation of crimes far beyond anyone's imagination. How could a man who seemed so ordinary, so approachable, fall so deeply into such heinous criminal activities? This was the question haunting FBI investigators as they pieced together the shocking evidence. The public was still reeling from the initial wave of revelations, struggling to come to terms with the man who had deceived them all. For many, it felt as though the rug had been pulled out from under them. How could a beloved TV star, who captivated audiences with his friendly smile and quick wit, be implicated in such horrific crimes? The raid, the discovery of the hidden room, and the unimaginable items inside sent shockwaves through the media. The story felt like it was ripped from the pages of a thriller novel, yet it was all too real, and the details kept coming, each more disturbing than the last. Rick Harrison, once seen as a self-made icon, now faced the prospect of life behind bars. No longer the charming businessman he appeared to be, he was branded a criminal mastermind whose rise to fame was tainted by dark criminal dealings. As news outlets scrambled to cover the breaking story, a flurry of questions began to swirl. What was really happening behind closed doors? Had the FBI's investigation only scratched the surface of a larger iceberg, or was this just the beginning of a vast criminal network tied to some of Hollywood's biggest names? How deep was Harrison's involvement, and how many others were complicit in the activities taking place within the secret walls of his mother's mansion? These questions, along with many others, propelled the investigation into uncharted territory where the stakes were higher than anyone could have imagined. To truly understand how someone like Rick Harrison could go from a beloved TV personality to the focal point of a federal investigation, we need to step back. We need to examine the journey that took him from the pawn shop to a lavish mansion, from the man who turned old items into instant cash to the alleged mastermind behind a criminal empire. The story of Rick Harrison's rise to fame is a classic tale of ambition, success, and the pursuit of the American dream. But it's also a story about the darker side of fame, where ambition can easily morph into something far more dangerous. Rick Harrison wasn't always a household name. Born in 1965, he grew up in a family deeply rooted in the pawn business. His father, Richard Benjamin Harrison Sr., founded the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop in Las Vegas in 1989. As a young man, Rick wasn't immediately drawn to the family business. He tried his hand at various ventures, from selling insurance to starting a carpet cleaning company, but none of these projects panned out. Eventually, he returned to the pawn shop, where his father's reputation cast a large shadow. It wasn't until the early 2000s, when his son Corey began working at the shop, that things really took off. The shop became a family affair, with Rick, his father, and his son all taking on key roles in its day-to-day operations. The pivotal moment came when they decided to open their doors to television cameras. In 2009, Pawn Stars premiered on the History Channel, and Rick Harrison, along with his father and son, quickly became a phenomenon. The show was an instant hit, transforming the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop into one of the most famous pawn shops in the world. Rick became a household name, with global audiences captivated by his haggling, deal-making, and advice on everything from historical artifacts to pop culture memorabilia. Rick Harrison's life seemed like the quintessential success story, a man who started with nothing and built an empire from scratch. His image as a tough but lovable businessman won over audiences. He was portrayed as someone who understood the value of hard work, capable of turning the most obscure items into valuable treasures. Fans loved his no-nonsense attitude and his ability to negotiate prices while maintaining a friendly demeanor. But behind the scenes, things were not as they appeared. As Rick Harrison's fame grew, so did his wealth. He amassed a fortune that allowed him to live in luxury, soon moving into a lavish mansion far removed from the humble pawn shop where he began. But with this newfound wealth came the temptation of excess. What started as a successful career in a legitimate business gradually morphed into something darker. Was it the pressure of being constantly in the public eye? Was it the allure of wealth? Or was it something else entirely? At this point, no one truly knows what drove Rick Harrison to allegedly commit such horrific acts. As the investigation deepened, the public learned more about the secret room in his mother's mansion, a place sealed off from the rest of the house. It was in this room that the FBI uncovered stacks of cash, weapons, and documents tied to human trafficking. Papers related to illegal dealings were scattered throughout, indicating that Harrison was involved in something far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. What made this discovery even more chilling was the suggestion that Harrison wasn't acting alone. He was believed to have a network of accomplices who helped him run his illicit operation. The details of the investigation continued to unfold, with new revelations emerging daily. As authorities dug deeper, they uncovered more about the criminal network Harrison was allegedly a part of. But the question remains: how could someone who was once a symbol of the American dream become entangled in such darkness? Was this merely a case of a man who went too far, or was it a meticulously calculated plan from the start? At the heart of this scandal lies a profound sense of betrayal, a betrayal of the fans who adored Rick Harrison and the public who saw him as a symbol of success. How could they have been so wrong about the man they thought they knew? Do you believe there's something shady behind this bombshell discovery? Drop a 2 in the comments. If you think it's just a random coincidence, type a 3. Who's right? Who's wrong? Let's see who has the sharpest sixth sense. As the investigation continues, one thing is clear. Rick Harrison's fall from grace will be a story no one forgets. As the pieces of this terrifying puzzle come together, the full horror of the scandal becomes increasingly apparent. This is just the beginning. What the FBI found in Rick Harrison's mother's mansion is merely the tip of the iceberg. As the story unravels, we're bound to uncover more shocking details that will completely change everything we thought we knew about this man. The question now is, who else is involved? And how far does this web of corruption extend? Rick Harrison's journey from a small pawn shop in Las Vegas to the national spotlight is a quintessential American success story. It's the tale of a man who started with humble beginnings, faced countless challenges, and ultimately carved out a name for himself in a competitive industry. But behind this rags-to-riches tale lies a far more complex story, interwoven with ambition, perseverance, and a deep connection to the American spirit of reinvention. Born on March 22, 1965, in Davidson, North Carolina, Rick's early years were far from easy. Raised in a working-class family, he wasn't born into wealth. His father, Richard Benjamin Harrison Sr., was a businessman who eventually moved the family to Las Vegas in search of better opportunities. Rick's mother was also involved in business, and from a young age, Rick was surrounded by entrepreneurs. However, despite this early exposure to business, he initially struggled to find his path. Rick's road to success was anything but straightforward. After moving to Las Vegas, he took on various odd jobs, from selling insurance to working at different businesses. He couldn't seem to find a stable career that truly sparked his passion. At times, it seemed he might follow the conventional route of job hopping, trying and failing at ventures that never quite worked out. But this period of his life would later shape his understanding of business and how to achieve success in unconventional ways. It was when Rick decided to return to the family's pawn business that his life began to change. His father's gold and silver pawn shop, established in 1989, was a modest operation at the time. But Rick, drawing on his prior experiences and hard-earned business lessons, saw immense potential to expand and grow the business. Unlike many traditional pawn shops, the gold and silver pawn shop was located in the heart of Las Vegas, one of the most vibrant and lucrative tourist destinations in the world. In the early 2000s, the shop was still relatively unknown outside Las Vegas. Rick Harrison, alongside his father, Richard Sr., and his son, Corey, worked tirelessly to turn the pawn shop into a destination for both locals and tourists. At that point, the business wasn't yet a gold mine, but Rick understood the power of hard work and branding. Rick knew how to transform ordinary items into treasures in the eyes of customers. More importantly, he understood the game of perception, how to make people believe they were getting something valuable, even when they weren't entirely sure of its true worth. This keen insight into customer behavior was a turning point in Rick's development. He wasn't just selling objects, he was selling a dream, the dream of finding something special, whether it was a rare coin, a historical artifact, or just a piece of pop culture memorabilia. But beyond focusing on providing quality service and ensuring customer satisfaction, Rick understood the importance of creating a memorable experience. At his core, Rick was a showman, someone who knew that customers weren't just looking for a bargain. They were seeking the thrill of discovery. Rick's family wasn't just his business partners. They became an integral part of the brand's story. His father's old-school approach to business, combined with Rick's modern methods, allowed the shop to thrive. The trio, Rick, his father Richard Sr., and his son Corey, became the faces of the gold and silver pawn shop. They created a dynamic that was not only compelling but also relatable to the average viewer. It wasn't just about the items in the shop, it was about the people behind the counter, those who could turn a seemingly worthless piece of junk into a small fortune. In 2009, everything changed. The path to national fame was paved when Rick and his family agreed to let reality TV cameras into their pawn shop. At the time, no one could have predicted how the show would transform their lives. Pawn Stars, aired on the History Channel, was a gamble, a long shot for success in a landscape crowded with reality shows vying for attention. But Rick's charisma and the family dynamic made the show stand out. Viewers didn't just tune in to see the items passing through the pawn shop. They were drawn to Rick's no-nonsense business approach, his sharp wit, and his interactions with his father, Richard Sr., and his son, Corey. The show's success was immediate. Within just a few episodes, Pawn Stars became one of the network's top programs. Rick Harrison became a household name, and his shop turned into a must-visit destination for both tourists and fans of the show. Pawn Stars wasn't just about haggling over prices. It was about the stories behind the items, the historical significance of the memorabilia, and the family ties that held it all together. Rick's rise to fame was marked by his constant presence on screen. He became the face of the show, the voice of reason amidst the chaos of bargaining and deal-making. His easygoing, approachable nature resonated with viewers. He became a symbol of the American dream, a self-made entrepreneur who worked hard, took risks, and ultimately reaped the rewards. Fans saw in Rick a reflection of themselves, a hard-working man who had built something from nothing. The success of Pawn Stars didn't just change Rick's life, it transformed his family's as well. The business flourished and the family brand expanded. Rick became a beloved public figure, and his pawn shop became an integral part of the Las Vegas landscape. In the years that followed, Rick branched out into other ventures, launching his own product line and appearing across various media outlets. He was invited to speak at events, sharing his success story with aspiring entrepreneurs. To many, Rick Harrison embodied the American success story, a man who turned a small business into a national brand. Yet, amidst all this success, something was lurking beneath the surface, something no one could have predicted. Behind the scenes, Rick was allegedly living a double life. On one hand, he was the smart, charismatic businessman seen on television. On the other, he was accused of being entangled in a far darker world, a world of illegal activities unimaginable to most. The very fame that propelled him to the top became a double-edged sword, drawing attention to a hidden side of his life that was anything but glamorous. Rick Harrison's rise is a story of perseverance and ambition. It's the tale of a man who worked tirelessly to build a brand, a business, and a legacy. But it's also a story of how fame can be an alluring and dangerous force, leading even the most successful and admired individuals down a dark path. It was a seemingly ordinary morning in Las Vegas when the first signs of one of the most shocking events in recent history began to emerge. The usual hum of city life, blending the hustle of tourists and locals, was suddenly disrupted by an air of tension. A heavy energy seemed to hang in the air, signaling that something big was about to unfold. No one could have predicted just how far-reaching the impact would be. Rick Harrison has always been a master at controlling his narrative. As the face of Pawn Stars, he spent years crafting the image of a hard-working, no-nonsense businessman, an ideal symbol of the American dream. But like any carefully polished facade, cracks began to form. Rumors started to spread in the shadows, whispers of something far darker lurking beneath the surface of his wildly successful public life. Those rumors soon came to a head when federal agents arrived at Rick Harrison's mother's mansion in one of the most dramatic and unsettling FBI raids in recent memory. For months, authorities had been quietly investigating financial irregularities tied to Harrison's business dealings. The investigation began innocently enough with routine checks into tax records, financial statements, and the flow of money through the pawn shop and its affiliated businesses. But as the probe deepened, it became clear this wasn't just about a few missing dollars or overlooked taxes. It was about something much larger, far more sinister. As federal agents pieced together clues, they began to uncover evidence of illegal activities, money laundering, and connections to an organized crime network. The investigation, initially focused on financial misdeeds, slowly zeroed in on the heart of Rick Harrison's world. That's when the FBI realized the scope of what they were dealing with. It wasn't just about stolen goods or unreported profits. It was a vast criminal operation that had been running right under the noses of authorities for years. The FBI's discovery of a hidden room inside Rick Harrison's mother's mansion was the moment the entire investigation took a terrifying turn. A routine search meant to uncover paperwork and financial records unexpectedly exposed a network of corruption, a world of illegal activity far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The raid was conducted with the precision of a military operation. Federal agents, dressed in tactical gear, arrived in the early morning hours. They surrounded the mansion, their presence known only to a select few. Word quickly spread across Las Vegas. The FBI had descended upon the home of one of the city's most famous residents. Local media outlets buzzed with rumors, but no one knew exactly what was happening inside the mansion. In a city that thrived on secrets, this was a secret that had been kept for far too long. The mansion, once a symbol of Rick Harrison's success, now became the scene of a federal operation that would expose a web of lies, deception, and crime. As agents entered the mansion, they knew they were stepping into a place that held answers to questions no one had dared to ask. The hidden room, sealed off from the rest of the house, was their first stop. What they found inside was truly horrifying. The room was not just a forgotten storage space. It was a secret vault, a hideaway filled with dark and disturbing evidence. The walls were lined with shelves holding untraceable documents, papers linking Rick Harrison to a series of financial transactions that appeared to fall far outside the bounds of legal activity. There were stacks of cash piled high, as if mocking the notion of legitimate wealth. And then, perhaps most shockingly, there were documents tied to a far darker crime, evidence of human trafficking. The FBI agents stood frozen for a moment, trying to grasp the full scope of what lay before them. The room had been expertly concealed, hidden behind a false wall, a deliberate act of subterfuge that suggested a level of planning and forethought far beyond simple financial crimes. This was the work of someone who had been operating in the shadows for years, someone who knew how to cover their tracks, someone who had carefully constructed a criminal empire beneath the surface of their public life. As the agents began sifting through the documents, they found detailed records of transactions involving stolen artifacts, illegal weapons, and human trafficking. The human trafficking materials were the most chilling. There were photographs, names, and addresses, evidence of victims, people whose lives had been shattered in unimaginable ways. The documents pointed to a tightly organized network, operating quietly and efficiently under the radar, aided in part by Harrison's fame and public persona. To the outside world, Rick Harrison was the face of a legitimate business, a family man running a pawn shop in Las Vegas. But behind closed doors, he was allegedly linked to an underground world of crime that few could have fathomed. What made the discovery even more disturbing was the suggestion that Harrison wasn't acting alone. The documents found in the hidden room revealed the involvement of several other key players, individuals who had helped facilitate the operation and kept the system running smoothly. There were names, phone numbers, and connections that extended far beyond the pawn shop, reaching into the darkest corners of the criminal underworld. The FBI had uncovered not just evidence of a single crime, but an entire network of illegal activity that had been flourishing for years. As the raid continued, agents began uncovering further evidence of Harrison's involvement in money laundering schemes. The stacks of cash found in the hidden room were traced back to illegal sources, suggesting that Harrison's pawn shop had been used as a front to launder money for organized crime syndicates. What had once been a business built on the idea of honest haggling and quick transactions had turned into something far more nefarious. The pawn shop, once an emblem of success and Americana, was allegedly a cover for criminal activity. In the days following the raid, news outlets were flooded with reports about the discovery. The story of Rick Harrison's fall from grace became a sensation, with headlines across the country proclaiming his arrest and the shocking evidence found in the mansion. For many, it was hard to reconcile the charming businessman they had seen on television with the man now accused of being a criminal mastermind. How could someone who had built a career on being likable and trustworthy end up involved in something so vile and sinister? The shock and disbelief were palpable, and the media couldn't get enough of the story. The investigation was far from over. The FBI had only scratched the surface of Harrison's involvement in the criminal underworld. As authorities continued to dig deeper, more revelations came to light. The hidden room in his mother's mansion was just the beginning. New leads emerged, pointing to an even darker network of criminal activities. And as the investigation expanded, one thing became abundantly clear. The story of Rick Harrison was no longer that of a self-made businessman. It was the story of a man whose public persona was nothing more than a carefully crafted facade, hiding a far darker reality. The FBI's discovery of the hidden room in Rick Harrison's mother's mansion was a moment that forever altered the course of the investigation. The events of that fateful day unfolded with precision, but the true horror of what was concealed in that room didn't fully hit the investigators until they had time to process what they had found. It was a chilling scene. A room deliberately sealed off, hidden behind a wall, out of sight from anyone entering the mansion. This was no ordinary storage space. It was a secret vault, containing not just items of monetary value, but pieces of a far darker puzzle. When pieced together, they painted a terrifying picture of Rick Harrison's secret life. The mansion itself was a grand affair, located in one of Las Vegas's wealthiest neighborhoods. With its sweeping staircase, luxurious furnishings, and expansive rooms, it was the kind of place you'd expect a millionaire businessman to call home. But like any mansion, it had its secrets, hidden corners, private spaces, and areas not meant for public eyes. Harrison, with all his wealth and success, had chosen this home for its privacy and ability to keep his personal life out of the spotlight. Little did anyone know that the privacy he craved would become his downfall. When the FBI agents first arrived at the mansion, they were fully aware of the gravity of the situation. This was no ordinary raid. It was the culmination of months of investigation, months of piecing together financial records and criminal activities, all pointing back to Rick Harrison and his pawn shop. They had already uncovered evidence of money laundering and illegal transactions, but they had no idea just how deep this rabbit hole went. The agents knew that if there was something truly incriminating to find, it would be carefully hidden, deliberately concealed from view. As they moved through the mansion, the search led the agents to a seemingly innocuous area, a guest room that, on the surface, appeared no different from the others. The room was spacious, with heavy curtains drawn over the windows and a thick carpet covering the floor. But something felt off. The agents noticed that one section of the wall looked slightly different. The paint didn't quite match, and there were faint scratches on the floor, as if the area had been moved or disturbed recently. At that moment, they realized they were standing in front of something far more significant than a guest room. With determination, the agents began examining the wall more closely. They pressed and probed, and in that instant, the weight of their discovery began to sink in. Hidden behind a false wall was a secret room. This wasn't a forgotten closet or an unused storage space. It was a carefully constructed vault, built for a very specific purpose, to conceal something valuable. But what lay behind that wall wasn't just valuable, it was terrifying. The room was pitch black, its contents shrouded in mystery until the agents flipped on the lights. The first thing they saw was stacks of untraceable documents, papers, receipts, and files detailing a series of clearly illegitimate transactions. As they reviewed the paperwork, the agents realized these weren't ordinary business records. These were the tools of someone operating in the shadows, moving money, laundering funds, and creating a paper trail designed to evade detection. There were names, accounts, and details of deals that, if left unexamined, could have remained hidden forever. But it wasn't the documents that made the agents pause. It was what they found next. As they ventured deeper into the room, they discovered neatly stacked bundles of cash, organized in a way that suggested meticulous planning. This wasn't the kind of money you stash away for a rainy day. This was the result of something highly organized, something far more sinister. The sums were staggering, with large amounts clearly siphoned from illicit activities. It was money with no legitimate origin, no real explanation. It was the kind of money criminals move quietly, far from the prying eyes of law enforcement, and it had been sitting in this room, hidden from the outside world for years. But the true horror lay in what came next. As the agents continued their search, they found boxes and bags containing photographs, documents, and items linking Rick Harrison to a far more terrifying world, the world of human trafficking. The agents were stunned. The human trafficking materials were unlike anything they had expected to find. There were photographs of individuals, some unrecognizable, some barely clothed, along with documents detailing the horrific specifics of the trafficking operation. On the back of some photos were written names, locations, and dates, along with details of how these individuals were moved across borders and sold into slavery. The realization that Rick Harrison, the man who had been the face of a family-friendly reality TV show, could be connected to such a vile operation was almost too much to comprehend. The agents felt a sense of disbelief as they continued to pore over the materials. How could someone who built a business empire on selling antiques and collectibles be involved in something as horrific as human trafficking? It didn't add up. But as the investigation continued, more pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The documents tied to the trafficking operation suggested it had been running for years, operating in the shadows, with Harrison's pawn shop as an integral part of the network. It became clear that Harrison's business was not just a pawn shop. It was a front, a place where criminals could launder money, move stolen goods, and cover their tracks. The hidden room revealed not only a financial empire built on crime, but an operation that extended far beyond the walls of the mansion. It seemed Harrison had been living a double life. One as the carefully crafted image of a successful businessman, masking the true nature of his activities. Now the questions were more numerous than ever. How deep was Harrison's involvement? Who else was involved? And how many people had been hurt by this dark, secret network? The FBI agents left the mansion that day with a heavy burden. They had uncovered evidence of criminal activities far beyond anything they had anticipated. They had exposed a man who built a business empire on lies and deception. But they knew this was just the beginning. The hidden room was only part of a much larger operation, and as the investigation continued, they would uncover even more shocking revelations about Rick Harrison and his secret life. As the FBI agents continued their search through the hidden room in Rick Harrison's mother's mansion, the chilling discovery of human trafficking materials dealt a devastating blow to the investigation. The room, initially thought to be a mere repository for stolen money and laundered funds, revealed its darkest secret. the systematic exploitation of vulnerable individuals in ways that were as horrifying as they were shocking. The connection to human trafficking, once a vague and unsubstantiated rumor, now became the central focus of the investigation. It completely changed how the FBI viewed Rick Harrison and his operations. The materials found in that secret room were overwhelming in their depravity. There were stacks of photographs, many showing young individuals, some barely recognizable, some with their faces obscured, others silently enduring pain. Accompanying the photos were handwritten notes detailing dates, locations, and the names of those involved in the trafficking operations. Some names on the lists were familiar. Victims reported missing in various parts of the country, whose disappearances had baffled local authorities for years. Others were just numbers, faceless victims in a vast network of exploitation. Every detail seemed to tie back to Rick Harrison's pawn shop, a place long considered legitimate by the public, where people came to haggle over antiques and treasures, unaware of the dark dealings happening behind the scenes. This discovery was a wake-up call for the investigators, who had initially assumed the case would be limited to financial crimes or the illegal handling of stolen goods. However, what they found was far more terrifying. A network that stretched beyond the confines of a single pawn shop, reaching international borders, criminal organizations, and a deeply entrenched underground system of human trafficking. As the FBI began connecting the dots, they uncovered a chilling truth. Rick Harrison, once a symbol of the American dream, now stood at the center of a global criminal operation. The photographs and documents were just the beginning. As investigators dug deeper, they found evidence that the pawn shop was being used as a cover for trafficking activities. With its international clientele and diverse inventory, the pawn shop provided the perfect front for moving people, goods, and money across borders without raising suspicion. What had appeared to be just a pawn shop on a popular TV show was, in fact, a carefully orchestrated hub of illegal activity, a place where criminals could use legitimate transactions to conceal their trafficking operations. The most shocking discovery came when the agents found detailed records indicating how the trafficking operation was run through the pawn shop. According to the documents, victims were often brought in under the guise of selling valuable items. Traffickers would bring individuals, sometimes as young as 16, claiming they wanted to sell high-value antiques, art, or collectibles. Once inside the pawn shop, these individuals were manipulated and coerced into becoming part of the trafficking operation. Some were promised jobs at the shop, while others were lured with promises of a better life elsewhere, only to find themselves trapped in a brutal cycle of exploitation. As the FBI pieced together the timeline of events, it became clear that Harrison's pawn shop was just one part of a much larger network. Victims were transported across state lines, sometimes to other parts of the country and even overseas. The traffickers used a combination of deception, manipulation, and force to keep their victims under control, using the pawn shop as a cover to make their movements appear legitimate. It was a meticulously constructed system that had been operating for years, right under the noses of law enforcement and the public. The connection between the pawn shop and the human trafficking network was both shocking and intricate. Harrison's business had long been a source of pride for him, a symbol of success and his ability to turn ordinary items into valuable treasures. But as the FBI's investigation uncovered more details, it became clear that his shop was being used to facilitate the movement of people across borders, launder money for criminals, and conceal the activities of a dangerous underground organization. Police and federal authorities had been completely unaware, too focused on the legitimate side of the business to notice the sinister activities taking place behind closed doors. The realization that Rick Harrison, the beloved star of Pawn Stars, could be involved in such a despicable crime was a devastating blow to the public. He had always been a likable, down-to-earth figure, someone who could haggle over prices with a smile, someone who seemed trustworthy and genuine. But the man viewers saw on television was not the man they thought he was. The FBI had uncovered evidence of years of criminal activity, and worse, Harrison was at the center of it all. The man who built his empire on the image of an approachable, everyday businessman had been hiding a far darker side, one completely at odds with the public persona he had so carefully crafted. The evidence continued to pile up as the investigation progressed. Beyond the photographs and documents, the FBI found recordings that provided further insight into the operation. These recordings captured phone calls and meetings between Harrison and several individuals, some of whom were notorious criminals with ties to international smuggling rings. The conversations were filled with coded language and veiled threats, indicating that Harrison was fully aware of the trafficking activities taking place. He was not just a passive observer, but an active participant in the network, helping to move victims and launder the proceeds of their exploitation. As details of the trafficking operation emerged, the FBI began uncovering links between Harrison's activities and other criminal enterprises. Some of the names in the documents and recordings were tied to organized crime syndicates, human trafficking rings, and other illicit operations. The scope of the operation far exceeded anything anyone had anticipated. It was a shocking realization for the agents involved. They weren't just investigating a pawn shop or a few bad actors in the business world. They were dismantling a criminal network that spanned continents, exploiting the most vulnerable for profit and power. The connection to human trafficking was the darkest part of this story, but it was also the one that would ultimately define Rick Harrison's legacy. As the investigation continued, the FBI worked tirelessly to track down victims and bring the traffickers to justice. But the road ahead was long, and the damage done was irreparable. Harrison's empire had been built on the suffering of countless individuals, and the truth had finally come to light. His fall from grace was swift and unforgiving. Once a TV star with millions of adoring fans, he had now become the face of a global criminal operation that spanned years and continents. As the investigation progressed, the true scale of the human trafficking network began to unfold, revealing the full extent of the damage caused by Harrison and his collaborators. The victims of the trafficking ring were scattered across the globe, many still trapped in a nightmare of exploitation and abuse. The FBI worked relentlessly to locate them and provide the support needed to escape the clutches of the criminal network. But for many, the road to freedom was long, and the scars of their experiences would never fully heal. The discovery of human trafficking materials in the hidden room at Rick Harrison's mother's mansion was only the beginning. As the FBI's investigation deepened, another horrifying element of Harrison's criminal network came into focus: money laundering and smuggling. The documents, photographs, and recordings recovered during the raid painted a picture of a highly organized and sophisticated system that allowed Harrison to move vast sums of illicit money and stolen goods across borders while maintaining the appearance of a legitimate businessman. The scale of this operation far exceeded what anyone could have anticipated. The deeper the FBI dug, the clearer it became that Harrison had been running a criminal empire on a global scale. Money laundering, the act of making illegally obtained funds appear legitimate, was a core component of Harrison's operation. It wasn't just a side hustle, it was crafted and executed as meticulously as any of his legitimate dealings in the pawn business. For years, the gold and silver pawn shop had served as a front, a place where criminals could launder dirty money and exchange illicit goods without raising suspicion. When the FBI reviewed Harrison's financial records, it became evident that the pawn shop was the central hub of a larger, more sophisticated network that spanned continents. The money laundering process was complex, involving multiple stages of moving illicit funds through legitimate channels to obscure their criminal origins. Harrison's pawn shop was the perfect vehicle for this, thanks to the constant stream of transactions that could be used to hide illegal money. Clients would bring in stolen goods, valuable artifacts, or even counterfeit items, which were then exchanged for cash or credit at the pawn shop. These items, once traded, would be sold to unsuspecting buyers, with the proceeds funneled through legitimate channels, creating a seemingly innocent paper trail. Initially, the system worked flawlessly. Criminals could drop off stolen goods or items acquired through illegal means and receive cash in return, which could then be used for legitimate purchases or investments. With its mix of rare antiques, historical items, and high-value collectibles, the pawn shop made it easy for Harrison to disguise the true nature of the transactions. By selling high-value items and moving money through seemingly normal exchanges, Harrison turned massive sums of dirty money into legitimate income. The sheer volume of transactions at the shop made it simple to blend illicit funds with legitimate ones, creating a facade of legality that fooled both law enforcement and the public. However, the FBI soon discovered that the pawn shop's operations were just the tip of the iceberg. As investigators delved deeper into the financial records, they uncovered links to international smuggling rings. The same network responsible for human trafficking was also involved in smuggling valuable, often stolen goods across borders. Harrison's pawn shop was a convenient front for moving high-value items, including rare artifacts, precious metals, and historical treasures acquired illegally or through shady channels. The smuggling operation was far more sophisticated than anyone could have imagined. Through his connections in the pawn business, Harrison had access to a network of buyers, sellers, and middlemen who facilitated the movement of stolen goods across international borders. Items were smuggled into the United States, disguised as legitimate antiques or artifacts, and then sold to collectors or wealthy buyers who had no idea they were purchasing stolen property. These transactions were carefully documented with fake receipts and invoices, making the items appear legal. The proceeds from these sales were funneled through Harrison's pawn shop, where they were cleaned and reintegrated into the legitimate economy. The scale of this operation was staggering. The FBI uncovered evidence that Harrison was involved in smuggling rings spanning multiple continents. Some of the items passing through his pawn shop were linked to international crime syndicates specializing in trafficking stolen cultural artifacts and precious metals. These items, often taken from war zones or looted from museums, were smuggled into the U.S. and sold through Harrison's shop, generating massive profits for the criminals behind the operation. As investigators pieced together the evidence, it became clear that Harrison's pawn shop had become a key player in a global smuggling and money laundering network. One of the most troubling aspects of the operation was how Harrison leveraged his fame to hide the criminal activities taking place behind the scenes. As the star of Pawn Stars, he became a prominent figure in the world of collectibles and antiques, granting him access to a network of high-profile buyers and sellers. This public persona allowed him to build credibility and gain the trust of wealthy individuals, art collectors, and international buyers, many of whom had no idea they were purchasing stolen goods or laundering illicit funds. By aligning himself with legitimate businesses and maintaining an image of success and integrity, Harrison shielded his criminal activities from scrutiny for years. The deeper the FBI dug, the more they realized that Harrison had become an indispensable part of this global smuggling network. As the investigation continued, agents found evidence linking Harrison to several notorious international criminals specializing in the trafficking of stolen goods. Some were well known in the world of art theft, while others had ties to organized crime syndicates involved in drug trafficking and money laundering. Through his pawn shop, Harrison had unwittingly become a key player in a larger criminal operation that spanned the globe. The FBI also discovered that Harrison had used his pawn shop as a front to launder money through various legitimate channels. The sheer volume of transactions at the shop, combined with the diversity of rare collectibles and high-value items, made it easy to disguise the movement of illicit funds. Proceeds from these sales were funneled through a series of shell companies and offshore accounts, obscuring the true source of the money and making it difficult for law enforcement to trace. Harrison's ability to move large sums of money with little oversight had allowed him to amass a vast fortune while staying one step ahead of the authorities. One of the most shocking discoveries made by the FBI was the massive scale of the money laundering operation. Documents uncovered revealed that millions of dollars had been funneled through Harrison's pawn shop into offshore accounts, creating a complex web of financial transactions spanning multiple countries. This money was used to fund additional criminal activities, including drug trafficking, arms dealing, and the maintenance of an active human trafficking network. The FBI's investigation revealed that Harrison had been living a double life. On one hand, he was a successful businessman and a beloved TV personality. On the other, he was part of a global criminal network, using his fame and business as a front to conceal illegal operations. The fallout from the discovery at Rick Harrison's mother's mansion was swift and far-reaching. What began as an investigation into financial irregularities and illegal activities quickly escalated into a national scandal. As details of Harrison's criminal empire spread like wildfire across media outlets, the public, once enamored with the charming self-made businessman they saw on Pawn Stars, was left in shock and disbelief. The man they had admired and trusted had been hiding a dark secret spanning years, involving some of the most heinous crimes imaginable. Harrison's arrest was just the beginning of a media frenzy. As news outlets scrambled to cover the details of the investigation, they were met with a flood of new revelations, each more shocking than the last. What had once been a beloved TV show became a symbol of betrayal and deceit. The public's trust in Harrison was shattered, and the pawn shop, once the cornerstone of his success, was now seen as a front for criminal activity. Harrison's fall from grace was rapid, with no way back. In the days following his arrest, Rick Harrison became the subject of intense scrutiny. Every move he made was dissected by the media, with journalists digging into his past, business dealings, and personal life. They found that the public persona Harrison had so carefully crafted was nothing more than a facade designed to mask the criminal empire he had been running in the shadows. The charming businessman with the quick wit and easy smile was now exposed as the mastermind behind a global network of human trafficking, money laundering, and smuggling. The world had been deceived, and the fallout was catastrophic. The shockwaves from the scandal extended beyond Harrison's personal life, reaching Pawn Stars, the show that had made him a household name. Once a hit reality series beloved by millions, it now faced fierce backlash. The show's future became uncertain as fans turned away in disgust. The image of the gold and silver pawn shop as a family-friendly business was forever tainted, and many questioned whether the show could continue without Harrison at the helm. The producers of Pawn Stars faced a tough decision. They had spent years building the brand around Harrison and his family, creating a unique dynamic that resonated with audiences. But now, with Harrison facing serious charges, the show's future hung in the balance. Would viewers continue to watch knowing its star was implicated in a horrific criminal network? Could the remaining cast members carry on without the central figure who had driven the show's success? The producers were forced to navigate a delicate balancing act, weighing the show's financial success against the moral and legal implications of continuing with Harrison's involvement. For the Harrison family, the fallout was both professional and deeply personal. Harrison's father, Richard Benjamin Harrison Sr., the co-founder of the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop, was devastated by the revelations. Richard Sr. had built the business from the ground up, and learning that his son was involved in such criminal activities was a gut-wrenching betrayal. Harrison's son, Corey, who had worked alongside his father at the pawn shop and featured prominently on the show, was also rocked by the news. Corey had always been close to his father, and the public humiliation of his family was something he struggled to come to terms with. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Harrison's criminal activities extended far beyond his involvement with the pawn shop. Evidence collected by the FBI suggested he had been operating a vast and sophisticated network of illegal activity, with ties to organized crime syndicates and international smuggling rings. The human trafficking materials found in the hidden room were just the tip of the iceberg. The full extent of Harrison's involvement in smuggling, money laundering, and other criminal enterprises was still being uncovered, and the legal consequences would be severe. Harrison's arrest sent shockwaves through the Las Vegas community, where he had once been a well-known and respected figure. The Gold and Silver Pawn Shop had become a city landmark, attracting tourists from around the world eager to see the place that had made Harrison famous. But as the investigation continued, it became evident that the shop was not the thriving business it appeared to be. The pawn shop was a front for criminal activity and part of a much larger operation spanning multiple countries. Harrison had used his success and fame to shield his illegal dealings from public view, and the revelation of his criminal activities shattered the shop's image as a legitimate business. The legal fallout for Rick Harrison was swift and unforgiving. Following his arrest, he was charged with a range of serious offenses, including human trafficking, money laundering, smuggling, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his defense team struggled to mount a viable defense. Harrison, once known for his wit and charm, now faced the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison. In addition to the criminal charges, Harrison also faced civil lawsuits from victims exploited by the trafficking network. Many of the individuals whose images were found in the hidden room were identified as victims of the trafficking operation. These victims, some forced into servitude or subjected to unimaginable abuse, were now seeking justice. The lawsuits would be lengthy and complex, but they represented a small part of the larger moral and legal reckoning Harrison would face in the years to come. As the investigation continued, the full extent of Harrison's involvement in the criminal empire became clear. The FBI uncovered further details about his financial dealings, revealing how he used the pawn shop as a front for laundering money and smuggling stolen goods. The criminal network Harrison was connected to was vast, and the consequences of his actions were far-reaching. The damage he caused to human trafficking victims, the families of those exploited, and the public's trust in his business was immeasurable. The media, always eager for sensational stories, pounced on Harrison's downfall with enthusiasm. Headlines screamed with shocking phrases like, "Pawn Stars, Rick Harrison, from TV star to crime kingpin," and "The Horrifying Secrets of Rick Harrison's Hidden Empire." The public, many of whom had once viewed Harrison as a symbol of the American dream, now turned against him with disdain. The reaction on social media was swift, with countless memes, tweets, and satirical posts mocking Harrison's downfall. Once a beloved figure, Harrison quickly became the subject of ridicule and scorn. His collapse extended beyond his personal life and career. It sent shockwaves through the entire reality TV genre. The public began to question the authenticity of the shows they once loved. If someone like Rick Harrison, who portrayed himself as a principled businessman, could hide such a dark secret, what else might be lurking behind the scenes of reality television? The Pawn Stars scandal triggered increased scrutiny of the genre, with many viewers questioning the ethics of shows that profit from portraying the lives of individuals who may not be as genuine as they seem. As the legal battles continued, Rick Harrison's life became a study in public humiliation and loss. The man who once seemed invincible, whose every word was followed by millions of fans, now faced a future defined by legal fees, public contempt, and the looming specter of a life sentence. His fall from grace was swift and unforgiving, and the impact of his actions would be felt for years to come. As the investigation into Rick Harrison's criminal activities expanded, experts from various fields were called upon to provide insights into the case, from law enforcement officials to psychologists and legal analysts. Their perspectives offered a deeper understanding of the motives behind Harrison's actions, the methods he used to conceal his crimes, and the impact of his downfall on both the public and the criminal justice system. This section delves into these expert insights, shedding light on the broader implications of the case and how it fits into the larger context of celebrity crime, organized crime, and the psychology of betrayal. The law enforcement officials involved in the investigation were the first to recognize the true scope of the criminal network Harrison was tied to. Initially, the case appeared to be a straightforward investigation into financial irregularities. However, as more evidence came to light, it became clear that Harrison's operation went far beyond money laundering. It was a multifaceted criminal empire encompassing human trafficking, smuggling, and a series of illegal financial dealings spanning multiple continents. For the investigators, this case was a sobering reminder of how expansive organized crime can be, even when it operates under the guise of legitimacy. Rick Harrison was the perfect cover, said a senior FBI agent involved in the investigation. His public persona as a self-made businessman, combined with the visibility of pawn stars, allowed him to fly under the radar for years. His pawn shop wasn't just a place for buying and selling antiques, it was a hub for criminal activity, and he used his fame to deflect suspicion. The agent went on to explain how Harrison's celebrity status helped him evade detection for so long. In this line of work, we often see famous people believe they're untouchable, he said. They have the resources, the influence, and the ability to manipulate the system. Harrison knew how to exploit his popularity to mask his criminal dealings. People trusted him, and that's what made him so dangerous. When you're a beloved public figure, people don't question your actions as much. As the investigation deepened, law enforcement experts also recognized the complexity of the network Harrison was part of. This wasn't just a lone actor running a small-time racket, another agent said. Harrison was connected to international crime syndicates that had been operating for years. The smuggling rings, the trafficking networks, the money laundering operations. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a larger, coordinated effort to make illicit activities appear legitimate. The pawn shop was the perfect vehicle for that. The investigation revealed that Harrison operated within a tightly interconnected web of criminals, each playing a specific role. The pawn shop served as a middleman, moving stolen goods, laundering money, and providing cover for trafficking operations. Harrison's central position in this web made it difficult for authorities to pinpoint the extent of his involvement until the raid uncovered the hidden room. Only then did the true scale of his operations begin to surface. Legal analysts were quick to note the severity of the charges Harrison faced and their potential consequences. With charges ranging from money laundering to human trafficking, Harrison was looking at a lengthy prison sentence, possibly for life. But beyond the criminal charges, legal experts also focused on the broader implications of the case. The fallout from this scandal extended beyond Harrison's personal fate, potentially impacting the entire reality TV industry and how the public perceives celebrity culture. The legal ramifications are enormous, said a prominent criminal defense attorney. Harrison isn't just facing charges related to his pawn shop, he's implicated in human trafficking, a federal crime with severe penalties. There are also the money laundering charges, which carry long sentences. The evidence against him is overwhelming, and the prosecution will likely push for a life sentence given the gravity of the crimes he's committed. The attorney further explained that Harrison's case could set a precedent for how the criminal justice system handles celebrity criminals. In many ways, this case is emblematic of the issues we face in society. We tend to look up to celebrities, idolize them, and that can make it harder to see them for who they really are. Harrison hid behind his fame for years, and it took a major investigation to uncover the full extent of his criminal activities. The legal system needs to send a clear message that celebrity status is not a shield from the law. The case also raised critical questions about how law enforcement and the legal system deal with celebrity criminals. We've seen cases like this before, where famous people are caught up in criminal activity, but their fame helps them avoid serious consequences. Another legal expert noted. In Harrison's case, he used his TV show as a platform to build credibility and trust. People didn't question his actions because they saw him on TV every week, giving advice and acting like a trustworthy businessman. But in reality, he was a criminal, and the legal system has a responsibility to hold him accountable for his actions. The fact that Harrison's case involved both serious criminal charges and a highly publicized trial added layers of complexity. This will be a high-profile case attracting significant media attention, the attorney remarked. There's a lot at stake here, not just for Harrison, but for the reputation of reality TV and how the public views the justice system. This is a case that will make waves, and it'll be fascinating to see how the courts handle it. While legal experts and law enforcement focused on the factual aspects of the case, psychologists were more concerned with understanding why Rick Harrison became involved in such criminal activity in the first place. What drove him to transition from a successful businessman to a criminal mastermind? What compelled him to hide such a dark secret beneath his public persona? Psychologists studying the case pointed to a range of factors that may have contributed to Harrison's actions. What we're dealing with here is someone who had everything: fame, wealth, success, and yet still chose to engage in illegal activities, said Dr. Emily Harris, a criminal psychologist. Harrison's actions suggest a deep-seated need for control and power. He was living a double life, and part of that was about maintaining control over those around him and how the world perceived him. It's not uncommon for people in positions of power, especially public figures, to believe they can get away with anything. Their fame becomes a shield, and that can lead to dangerous behavior. Dr. Harris also noted that Harrison's involvement in human trafficking could be linked to a desire for domination and influence over others. Human trafficking is a crime rooted in control. Traffickers use manipulation, coercion, and sometimes outright violence to dominate their victims. Harrison's participation in this operation suggests he had a dark side, driven by a need to control vulnerable individuals. He may have viewed them as expendable pawns in a larger game. Another psychologist, Dr. David Grant, added that Harrison's descent into crime could be linked to the pressures of fame. The constant scrutiny of being a reality TV star can have a profound impact on a person's psychology. Celebrities often face immense pressure to maintain their image and success, and that pressure can lead to risky behavior. In Harrison's case, it seems that fame gave him a false sense of invincibility. He believed he could operate in the shadows and maintain his image while secretly running a criminal operation. But ultimately, that pressure led to his downfall. These psychological insights help explain why someone like Rick Harrison, who achieved so much through hard work and perseverance, could fall into such dark and dangerous activities. The combination of fame, control, and psychological motives created a perfect storm, allowing him to conceal his criminal empire for so long. As the investigation into Rick Harrison's criminal activities continues to unfold, many people are beginning to ask a troubling question. How could someone who seemed so normal, even likable, commit such horrific crimes? Rick Harrison, the face of Pawn Stars, built an empire based on charm, a down-to-earth demeanor, and the image of a hard-working family man. He was a beloved TV personality, admired by millions of viewers, and a symbol of the American dream, seemingly embodying everything good about the entrepreneurial spirit. However, behind this carefully crafted facade lies a darker reality, involving human trafficking, money laundering, and organized crime. Psychologists and criminal behavior experts were quick to weigh in, trying to understand what drove Harrison to engage in such criminal activity. How did someone like him, who had achieved so much success, fall into a life of deception and exploitation? Was it the pressure of fame, the lure of easy money, or something deeper, something within his psyche that led him down this dangerous path? One of the most striking elements of Harrison's behavior, according to experts, was his apparent need for control. From his role as the owner of a successful pawn shop to his position as a reality TV star, Harrison was accustomed to being in charge. As a businessman, he had spent years negotiating, making decisions, and steering the course of his enterprise. He was a man who understood power and, perhaps more importantly, how to wield it. However, this need for control didn't stop at his business dealings. It extended into his personal life and, as it turned out, into the criminal operations he was allegedly running. According to Dr. Emily Harris, a criminal psychologist who studied Harrison's case, the desire for control was a key factor in his criminal behavior. For individuals like Harrison, control isn't just a professional necessity, it becomes a psychological need, Dr. Harris explained. When someone is in a position of power, they start to feel invincible, believing they can control not only their business but also their personal circumstances. This sense of control can lead to a sense of entitlement, where the individual feels they are above the law or immune to consequences. Harrison's involvement in human trafficking, for example, can be partly understood as an expression of this need for control. Human trafficking isn't just about financial gain, it's about dominating others, controlling their lives, and exploiting them for personal profit. The psychological mechanism behind this is deeply rooted in a desire for power and influence over others, an impulse that often becomes normalized for those operating in the criminal world. For Harrison, his success likely fueled this desire to manipulate his environment, which in turn made it easier for him to justify exploiting vulnerable individuals. Dr. Emily Harris suggests that Harrison's descent into crime may have been driven by a deep need to maintain control over his business and personal narrative. In the world of reality television, the pressure to maintain a certain image can be immense, she said. Harrison may have felt that he needed to preserve his facade at all costs, regardless of the price it would cost others. The darker side of his personality, the part that seeks power and control over others, could be something he hid, even from himself. Another significant factor in Harrison's psychological profile was the lure of easy money. As his fame and wealth grew, so did his ability to acquire and move vast sums of money. His success in the pawn business, paired with his celebrity status, created a perfect storm of financial opportunities. However, the more wealth he accumulated, the more accustomed he likely became to a lifestyle that required maintaining that wealth. For someone like Harrison, who had built his reputation as a savvy businessman, the temptation to engage in illegal activities to sustain his lifestyle would have been strong. Dr. David Grant, a psychologist specializing in criminal behavior, noted that for many criminals, especially those in positions of power, the allure of quick financial gain can be irresistible. Harrison was a man who had already achieved success through legitimate means, he said. But over time, the wealth, fame, and opportunities that came with his success may have led him to rationalize his actions. It's not uncommon for public figures to think they're above the law, especially when they see others in their circles engaging in risky behavior with little to no consequence. Dr. Grant further elaborated on the psychological phenomenon of moral disengagement, a concept in which individuals justify unethical behavior by separating their actions from their moral values. For Harrison, the idea of trafficking people or laundering money may have initially seemed like a way to expand his empire and secure his financial future. He may have convinced himself that these actions were necessary to keep his business running smoothly or to maintain his lifestyle. Over time, this rationalization can lead to a complete breakdown of moral boundaries. Harrison's ability to compartmentalize his actions, viewing them as separate from his public persona and moral compass, was key to his involvement in criminal activity. His world of high-value collectibles and rare antiques was the perfect cover for a network of illegal transactions. The more wealth he accumulated, the more emboldened he likely felt to push the boundaries of what was acceptable. The dark side of Harrison's personality, once dormant, began to take over as the temptation to keep the money flowing became too great to resist. His success and power may have blurred his moral boundaries, leading him to believe he could act without facing consequences. For many celebrities, the pressures of fame can have a profound psychological impact. In Harrison's case, his rise to stardom brought a level of scrutiny and public attention that may have been overwhelming. What was once a simple business transformed into a global brand, with Pawn Stars, attracting millions of viewers and making Harrison a household name. However, the psychological cost of this sudden fame is often underestimated. According to Dr. Grant, fame can exacerbate feelings of isolation, insecurity, and the need for validation. When a person's self-worth is tied to their public image, they can start to feel as though they are defined by that image, he explained. They live for the approval of others, for recognition, and for constant admiration. This need for validation can lead to anxiety, stress, and a sense of emptiness when the spotlight no longer shines as brightly. In Harrison's case, the transition from a small-time pawn shop owner to a reality TV star likely intensified his need for control and validation. As his fame grew, so did the pressure to maintain his public image. If the public saw him as a successful businessman with a solid reputation, it allowed him to continue building his wealth and influence. However, when the pressure to keep up appearances becomes too great, some celebrities may turn to dangerous behaviors to maintain their status. Harrison, once seen as a reliable figure, may have begun to view the criminal activities he engaged in as necessary to uphold his image. The darker side of his personality, the part that craved power, control, and wealth, started to take over, fueled by the psychological strain of being constantly in the public eye. As Harrison's criminal activities expanded, so did his ability to deceive himself. Cognitive dissonance, The mental discomfort that arises from holding conflicting beliefs or values can lead individuals to justify their behavior in ways that allow them to reconcile their actions with their self-image. For Harrison, the dissonance between his public persona as a trustworthy businessman and his involvement in criminal activity may have been too great to ignore. To alleviate this discomfort, he may have convinced himself that his actions were justified, even though they were clearly morally wrong. Dr. Emily Harris discussed this phenomenon in greater detail. Cognitive dissonance allows individuals to maintain a positive self-image while engaging in negative behaviors, she said. In Harrison's case, he may have seen his criminal activities as a means of protecting his empire, rationalizing that the ends justified the means. He might have told himself he was only doing what was necessary to stay ahead in a competitive business world, ignoring the fact that his actions caused immeasurable harm to others. The self-deception that accompanies cognitive dissonance can be powerful. In Harrison's case, the belief that he was merely doing what was necessary to maintain his success likely allowed him to operate without guilt, even as he participated in some of the most heinous crimes imaginable. This self-deception enabled him to separate his criminal behavior from his public image, allowing him to continue appearing as a respectable businessman in the eyes of his audience. As the investigation revealed, this self-deception allowed Harrison to run his criminal network without being plagued by conscience, even as he inflicted immeasurable suffering on his victims. The truth behind the discovery in Rick Harrison's mother's mansion remains a mystery, but it has undeniably captured the attention of the entire nation. Is this just the beginning? Stay tuned to the channel for the latest updates. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.